Hey there, and welcome back to Temporary Locals.
I'm Jared.
And I'm Megan. This week, our guest is taking us back to Egypt. But before we get into that, if you guys are new here, Jared and I are an adventure loving couple who share our real stories and experiences from the places that we've actually been. Or sometimes, like today, we host fellow travelers who've been to places that are on our bucket list. This one's a little bit special because Jared has been to Egypt, but we're bringing a bit of a different perspective today. So whether you're planning your next adventure or you're just here for the storytelling, we are thrilled to have you. You are in the right place, and we'd love it if you would subscribe and join us. We put out new episodes every week. So just to introduce our guest, we have today Vincent Kane, who is an explorer, adventurer, and researcher of esoteric mysteries. He speaks and presents slideshows and also hosts temple and pyramid tours of Egypt. And he's currently writing his first book. So we're very excited to chat with him today. And let's get into the episode.
Enjoy it.
Thanks for coming on, Vincent. We really appreciate you coming on here. And just take a moment and introduce yourself, and then we'll get into the bulk of the episode on your experiences in Egypt.
Great. Thanks, Megan. Thanks, Jared. My name's Vincent Kane, and I live in southwest England near the town of Glastonbury. Over many years, I grew a sort of deep interest for Egypt. And I watched a documentary about 13 years ago named The Pyramid Code by Dr. Carmen Bolter. And I already had a little interest in Egypt and in architecture, geometry, pyramids and such. But I watched that and I felt a real strong compulsion that I had to go there right away. As soon as I saw it, it had just been my birthday at the time. So I watched the documentary and I thought, I got to go. And I was there 6 days later. I flew straight to Luxor and had a little taster of it, just at a very touristy level on that occasion. I had no kind of foreknowledge, I just went there and winged it. And I checked out some temples around Luxor, headed over to the Red Sea for a bit, and it captivated me. But at that point in my life, I didn't have as much abundance and freedom of my time and my resources to go straight back. So I just sat with the experience for a number of years, and then eventually, about 5 years later, I finally made it to Cairo to see some pyramids, and from there I was completely hooked. And so I've been going frequently over the last 13 years. My third visit to Egypt, I went with some friends and we done a tour all over Egypt for maybe a couple of weeks or so. And I was very fortunate on that occasion to make friends with an Egyptian man named Hassan. And he works in tourism, not as a guide, but more as like a fixer, working with logistics and organisation for tours and so on. And that was at the beginning of 2020. And so I came home from that visit all fired up and inspired, and with the notion that I could go back there with this new contact that could assist me in like getting a lot more out of my visits. But then, of course, when 2020 came round, just after I got back, the whole world shut down. I was like, damn. I thought I was going to be going off on these adventures, and then I didn't know how long that was going to be off the menu, if forever, And so I took the time while there was no travel available. I took the time to dig deep into my studies. I've been studying on and off just for the love of it, not for any reason other than my own pleasure. I've been studying the kind of ancient mystery traditions, esoteric knowledge and wisdom, symbolism, geometry, mythology, and so on, ancient architecture. And I like to entertain the idea of prehistoric advanced civilization. Of course, I can't know for sure what our ancient history was, but it serves as a great motivation for me for my travel. So when the world had shut down, I took my time to really dig deep into my studies and really like up the game a bit. And when the borders opened again for travel a couple of years down the line, having not been able to travel for so long, I felt like I had to seize the day. And so I went straight back to Egypt as soon as the opportunity was there. And I organised a sort of test run for a tour just with a friend and I. We went over there and met my Egyptian friend Hassan, and we done a 2-week tour all over Egypt to kind of as a test run for how a group tour might work, where we might go and how we could plan the tour, what would it include and so on. And it was a lot of fun and a great success within its context. And so following that, all the times I've been since then, another like 6 or 7 or so times, I've worked with my friend there in Egypt to host small group tours, host and co-host, sometimes just me and Hassan, or sometimes with the other helpers and assistants. And so over that period of time, I've been really fortunate to get to loads of the incredible ancient sites, the tombs, the temples, the pyramids, the granite quarry in Aswan, and so on. And with repeated visits, obviously I've got to know the ancient sites more and more, with like going back again and again, but also to sort of get a real sort of up close and personal integration into the modern culture and into the country as it is today. And also going to repeat visits to ancient sites has been very fortunate in the sense that I've become a familiar face to some of the guards at the various temples and pyramids. And so over time, if you keep going back and you're friendly, there have been many occasions where I've been very fortunate to be allowed to go to kind of off limits places that are generally shut to tourists for, just for a very small, like little backsheesh. I've been gifted fantastic opportunities on lots of occasions, just lucky, fortunate timings where I just happened to turn up at the right place at the right time. And so, yeah, it's transformed my life in terms of travel, but also in terms of how I engage with the world around me. It's been so liberating and eye-opening and mind-opening for me to witness the incredible wonders of the ancient world up close and personal, especially the pyramids, like mind-boggling structures. Until you actually stand next to them, put your hands on them, you can't really comprehend what they are.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I think you summed up, like, I think a lot of people had that same experience in 2020 where you're just kind of like starting to make plans and then the whole world shuts down. But I think you made good use of the time, digging into the research and, making plans for when it was finally able to kind of open up again and we could.
Yeah, all travelers kind of have that COVID thing where we all are kind of connected in that way, where during the pandemic, we were all either somewhere or planning to go somewhere. And so we all kind of have that story of like where in the world we were. We'll always remember where exactly we were during the pandemic because we either weren't able to travel or we were traveling at the time. I think it sounds like you and I have a similar kind of story as far as our like interest in Egypt goes, and more specifically ancient Egypt, because despite us being on opposite sides of the pond, as they say, I think a lot of kids, at least in my generation, kind of grew up with movies like The Mummy and things like that. And so I was really fascinated with Egypt as a kid, just from like a young kid kind of standpoint. Then remember I saw the documentary Magical Egypt, which is John Anthony West. And I don't know if you're familiar with John Anthony West, but that documentary really fascinated me. And it really kicked off my real like interest in like really understanding ancient Egypt. And I want to hear more of your perspective of like when you first really laid eyes on specifically the Giza pyramids, because everything in Egypt is amazing, but the Giza pyramids really are like the pinnacle of civilization. And I also thought it was interesting. You said the first time you went to Egypt, you flew into Luxor, which is different, I think, than what most people do, right? Most people fly into Cairo like I did, like I think a lot of people did, but you flew into Luxor first, which is really interesting. Is there a reason you flew into Luxor?
Yeah, well, it's funny actually, because you just mentioned John Anthony West, and the reason I specifically chose Luxor was because I'd seen John Anthony West talking on a documentary about Luxor Temple, and he was presenting the backstory of, in the 1940s, there was a French alchemist and researcher named Schwaller de Lubix, and he'd done a 15-year study of Luxor Temple and come around to the conclusion that the temple, if you viewed from above, it represents the proportions of the human body. And I found that really fascinating, and I had to see it for myself. So yeah, that was a John Anthony West presentation that drew my attention to Luxor. And at the time, I didn't have the kind of time or the budget to explore all of Egypt, so I just went for that just as a start point. But I did feel a bit shortchanged that I hadn't managed to get to the pyramids on my first visit. And it was a whole 5 years till I actually got to Cairo. And funnily enough, like over the many years and decades, I've I've traveled quite extensively around the world. Up until I went to Cairo, I'd always either traveled with someone or traveled somewhere to meet someone. And I'd never done a completely solo trip. And in January 2018, I decided I had to go to the pyramids. So I went there on my own to Cairo for a week, and I saw the Giza pyramids and a number of other ones. And to get back to the question, having already explored quite a lot of Egypt in terms of temples and tombs and the place itself, which, the temples and the tombs, they're very dynastic Egyptian, they're covered in hieroglyphs and deities drawn on the wall and so on. Very distinctive, what we imagine Egyptian architecture might look like. But the moment I stepped onto the Giza plateau and I saw the mighty Sphinx before me with the 3 pyramids laid out, I was going there thinking this is just another facet of pharaonic dynastic Egypt. But the moment I stepped onto the plateau, I felt completely different, and I felt like I was stepping into, for want of a better word, I thought it was Atlantis. And I don't like to pin too much on specific names for specific ancient civilizations, but I am open-minded to the possibility of an Atlantean civilization in the very distant past. And I didn't have that in my mind when I got to the Giza pyramids. It was the last thing in my mind. I was just in Egypt thinking, like dynastic Egyptian, But yeah, that was the feeling I got, the Sphinx in particular, and it felt incredibly familiar. And of course, we've seen the pyramids and the Sphinx, they're such big icons in the sort of like group mind, in the sort of subconscious mind of the species all over the world. They're so iconic. But that said, it wasn't like that was getting me. It was like a real sense of familiarity, as if I felt like I was returning home to somewhere. It was very unexpected, a really beautiful feeling as well. It was an unexpected familiarity that I can't say I've ever felt before.
Yeah, it's like a visceral feeling when you step onto the plateau. It's a dichotomy in a sense, because you have the modern city of Cairo, which is a massive modern city, but you're standing next to these ancient structures, and despite the city of Cairo being right there, it's like you really feel like you're stepping back in time. Despite all the tourists there and everything, it's like it's a hard thing to really describe. It's a hard thing that I've to try to describe to people and put it into words and write about it. It's one of those things that you really don't know unless you go. And I hate saying that because it sounds like, I don't know. Yeah, it sounds pretentious in a way, I guess, but it really is the case. I've seen Machu Picchu. I've seen other incredible sites in my life, but the pyramids of Giza are, until you're standing there and looking at them, the magnitude.
Yeah, I agree entirely. I can't get enough of it. I've been to pyramids more times than I've been to Egypt, because sometimes I go multiple times to the Giza plateau in one visit. I'm not sure if I've got the count quite right, but I think I've been to Giza about 19 times now, with groups or on my own. And so I've explored a lot of the plateau itself outside of the pyramids, and I've been inside all of the big pyramids. And yeah, it's just, there's so much to see there. It's so vast. And if you go just once in your life, of course, the thing you really want to see is the pyramids and the Sphinx. But I feel really lucky and really fortunate to have been many times, because once I'd fully explored the big structures and the features of the site and took all my photos and been there with groups and friends and so on, I've done enough of that now when I go there, I can take my attention to any specific part that aren't the big features, and I can really explore the periphery without feeling like I'm missing out. And that's allowed me to really dig deeper into the rest of the plateau. And I found some incredible features if you just explore around the periphery and look at all the kind of bits that no one really sort of looks at or talks about, like partially buried tombs. And the further you go, the more you find. And you can see, if you look off into the desert, way out of the kind of area that you're even allowed to walk on, you can see there are countless more structures that are just not excavated. You can see straight lines in the sand, and it's incredible and it's mysterious. And I think also, I can't really grasp why archaeologists aren't there digging all the time. In all of these places, there's so much incredible stuff just waiting to be seen. So it's kind of going to be the gift that keeps on giving, I think, for archaeology and history. I don't think we'll ever get to the end of it in Egypt.
Yeah. Yeah. And kind of going along those lines, despite how incredible the pyramids of Giza are, as somebody who's traveled extensively through Egypt like yourself, what are some more, I guess you could say, underrated sites you've been to that I don't think a lot of people are aware of that you really enjoyed?
Well, I I, uh, I really like another one of the pyramid sites, a bit south of Cairo, a bit south of Giza. There's a pyramid site called Abusir, and it's probably about 5 miles south of Giza. If you stand at Abusir, you can see the Giza pyramids on the horizon just about. The Abusir pyramids, they're a bit more ruined and not as large and impressive as the Giza ones in terms of their scale. But I'd wanted to go there for like lots and lots of years, but the site had actually been closed to tourists for decades, completely off limits. And the only way to visit the site, still to present as far as I'm aware, is to pay a real hefty sum to the antiquities department in the government. Give them a few grand and they'll let you go in for 2 hours, but you'll be chaperoned by armed guards all the way. And so I really wanted to go to the place, and it was too abstract to include in any of my group tours to justify the big fee. And I'd gone there a few times to try and bribe my way in. Even on one occasion, we were talking to a guy that was going to sort of sneak us in on horseback before dawn, and I nearly parted with the money for it. And then I thought, if I get caught doing this, I might get banned from Egypt. So I decided not to go that way. But I really wanted to go there, and I couldn't imagine how it was going to happen. And then a few years ago, just after I'd done my first group tour, I decided that I'd just go and hang out there at the closest hotel that I could find, so that I could be in the hotel and observe the pyramids from the balcony. I thought that was my compromise. So I went with a couple of friends, and I booked 2 rooms in a little guest house. And as it turned out, all of the other guests in the guest house were archaeologists working on the site. And they'd been there for a couple of months, and they were just coming to the end of their season. And my friend Hassan Saeed, that I work with to do my tours in Egypt, real dear friend of mine, he knew that I was really, really into this Abusir pyramid site. And he had a word with the chief archaeologist, Dr. Mohammed. And on our last night in the guest house, I walked through the lobby, and this Dr. Mohammed called out my name, and he said, "Oh, are you Vincent?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Meet me in the lobby at 7 a.m." I was like, "Okay." So I got up kind of excited the next morning and went into the lobby, and I met Dr. Mohammed, and he's a other archaeologist, some German bloke. And he said, "Come with me." And he didn't really say much, but we went outside and jumped in the 4x4, and he drove us straight into the site, straight across the sand dunes, and pulled up next to the main pyramid of Sahara in the middle of the Abusir site. And he said, "All right, there you go. Have a look around for an hour and let yourself out." And he just left. So I got like the entire site to myself for an hour with no guards, no anyone. And it was really misty that morning as well, so I couldn't really see the horizon. I felt like it was just me and the pyramids. And so, yeah, that site, it's an incredible site. There's a few pyramids there and loads of ruins. And there's also quite an extensive amount of evidences of some kind of machine tooling, like drill holes in granite and saw marks and so on. It's like there's a excess of that there compared to any other site. So with the mysteries of like how by what means the ancient folks built the pyramids and so on, that site in particular is very interesting to me. But that wasn't really what was drawing me there. There's something more kind of magical that was drawing me there. I just felt like I needed to be in that space. And so, yeah, that site, if you're ever able to get to Abusir, I would very highly recommend that site. I do believe, actually, since the archaeology that was done there when I was visiting, I believe they're working towards making it available to the public rather than paying like a hefty fee to the government. So, fingers crossed that I'll start including that in future tours if it becomes available. So, yeah, that's a real highlight if you're ever able to get there. And another site that I'm really into, which it's not so like it's a bit known, but behind the temple of Seti I at Abydos is the Osirian, which is an ancient site that is cut straight into the bedrock with a body of water around it, and it goes like 50 feet down into the bedrock, and the water that surrounds it, it's not seawater and it's not Nile water. When people have like filtered it and drunk it, they reckon it has really powerful healing properties. There was a guy there that was doing some archaeology in the 1980s, I believe, and for whatever reason, he decided to start drinking this water, filtered, but drinking the water from the Osirian the water that's in the site. And he'd worn glasses for like 15 years or something. And after 6 weeks on site drinking the water, he didn't need glasses anymore. And there are other accounts of a similar nature there. The strange thing is, having determined that the water on that site isn't Nile water and it isn't ocean water, whether it's from a spring or whatever, we don't really know. There have been a number of attempts over the decades to pump out the site so that they can get down and explore underground chambers that are beneath the water level. But they've installed the most powerful pumps that can pump hundreds of gallons out every minute. And as fast as they pump the water out, it just keeps replenishing. So they can't actually empty the water to get down there. But the water just sits at a sort of, the level fluctuates over the season, but it's not flowing out anywhere. But if you try and get rid of it, it replenishes. So it's a very mysterious site. And although the temple next to it is a dynastic pharaonic temple, Seti I temple, which is a beautiful temple in itself, which is covered in hieroglyphs and decoration, the Assyrian that's sunken down behind has virtually nothing on it. It's just blank like the pyramid. So it speaks to me that it's from the pyramid builders, not the temple builders. And I believe that to be something a lot older. And there are some of the features of the stonework in the Assyrian that are very similar to the structure of the Sphinx enclosure at Giza, including, you might be familiar with the kind of stonework where the blocks, they're cut in a very irregular way, so they're kind of earthquake proof, and we get examples of it all over the world, where all the blocks are different shapes, and they go round corners and interlock at funny angles. And that's common to the Sphinx temple, the Valley Temple at Giza, and the Assyrian, but I haven't really sort of seen it in that way anywhere else in Egypt. So they seem to be related. And also John Anthony West had brought to the sort of attention of the world, as well as Schwaller de Lubic's, that the Sphinx enclosure has weather patterns that imply rain weathering from many thousands of years ago. And if you look around the enclosure of the Osirian, you'll see the same kind of weathering patterns on the stone enclosure there. So I believe they're of the same period and probably much older than the dynastic Egyptians.
Yeah. To kind of piggyback on that, the water erosion theory, that was, John Anthony West brought Dr. Robert Schoch to Egypt, who's a geologist. And, they attribute the Sphinx to the erosion on the Sphinx to, wind and sand erosion. But he concluded that it was, heavy water erosion, for anybody listening that doesn't know the story. And so, which would date the date of the Sphinx to be further back in history when there was heavy rainfall in the Sahara Desert. Because the Sahara Desert at one time was a lush, rainforest. I mean, they find whale bones in the Sahara Desert to this day. So it's a really interesting theory that I think, but yeah, a lot of the mainstream isn't willing to kind of change or budge on that at all. And that's kind of like all the timelines in Egypt are kind of skewed in that way, because like you were talking about Abusir, and that's a 5th dynasty site. They attribute it to the 5th dynasty, and like a lot of the centers in Egypt that are older were actually built better. And you would expect a civilization to get better at building these pyramids and temples and things. But the oldest stuff seems to be built the best, which kind of makes you wonder, like, was it all the same civilization that built these things, or was it different civilizations, throughout a longer time period than what they're saying?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I'll add 2 things to that. For one, you mentioned the Sahara Desert was once lush green, and it had waterways and huge lakes, apparently, really big freshwater lakes. And, I try to, when I look at sort of ancient history and what we're told compared to the evidence, I try to sort of, although I'll entertain very wild ideas for the fun of it, I try to kind of look at things in a very common sense way, with the notion of the Sahara once being a lush green jungle or forest or whatever, and it would have been inhabited because it had water of freshwater lakes and, food, wildlife and so on. In the official narrative, now that that's been brought into the equation, we're sort of like asked to believe that there was this like lush green jungle that supported life for however many millennia that was there. And then that turned overnight into a desolate wasteland, the Sahara, millions of miles of desert. And then after that, we're asked to believe that people come and built the most incredible structures in the known world in the desolate wasteland. And that doesn't add up to me. That seems like nonsense. It makes a lot more sense to me, in my mind at least, that these structures were built there because it was lush and green and inhabited and inhabitable, and that whatever turned the Sahara Desert to desert, whatever got rid of that may well have included the end of the sort of kind of prior civilization. It might be linked, in some kind of way. And then if you think like the Egyptian temples and pyramids, like they're on the edge of the Sahara. And so we've got like Egypt there with all these incredible structures, and then it's just like desert going out into, across to the west. But the chances are, there's a lot more that's related to the Egyptian structures, other structures that are further out into the desert. I don't doubt that if it was explored, there could be a whole load more stuff out there, So there's that. And then what you also said about the older structures seeming to be made better, and I fully agree with that. It seems like the older we go back, the size and the scale of the structures get bigger. The pieces of stone get bigger. Like in the later periods, the temples are beautiful and they're incredible, but you can see how they could have been achieved by everyday folks with everyday tools to some extent. Like for example, in the Temple of Karnak in Luxor, there's hundreds of columns in there, and they are incredible and they're massive, but they're not like single pieces. They're like made of blocks stacked up, and then you get just a few features within the temple where we've got these like dynastic bits with the blocks stacked up that carved in like some kind of limestone or sandstone. But then you find a couple of incredibly large obelisks in there that are cut out of granite, which is a lot harder of a stone. So it's harder to cut, but they look like better cut. They're more precise out of harder material. One of the obelisks in Karnak Temple, for example, is like well over 300 tons. And so, like people talking of ancient history and ancient engineering often mention the weights of things. And for folks that aren't into kind of engineering or so, they might, the number might not really sort of hit home. But consider this: if you look at an 18-wheeler truck, like an articulated lorry with a full load on it, 18 wheels, you're looking at about 40, 45 tons. So when you get like an obelisk that's like 350 tons, that's like 8 trucks all together in one piece of stone. And they're, like, how the hell did they do that? So the things that are bigger and heavier and better cut are the older ones. And I think there are many examples, including the example I just gave at Karnak, where I suspect that the really incredible stuff is from a much more ancient time. And the dynastic era was rather a rebuild rather than an origin. It was like rebuilding over a destroyed prior civilization and just saying, okay, well, we've got these little remnants of temples and structures here and there that were sacred to our ancestors, and let's rebuild a civilization to honor that and rebuild it and try to recreate it the best we can. I think that's possibly more where the dynastic part of the known Egyptian history comes into play.
Yeah, and you kind of talking about visiting Abusir, being able to kind of like have the site to yourself and all that. That's a really cool story, and those kind of things like can happen there. Sometimes you might have to pay somebody off, or you might have to make friends with somebody, but like getting special access to certain things is kind of it's something you hear about with Egypt, where you might not with other places that are a little more strict and stringent. When I was in Cairo, the first day we went to Dashur, and I went to the Bent Pyramid, and I got to go inside the Bent Pyramid, and it had just opened. I think it opened in July, and I was there in September. So I was, it was only open for a few months. So I was, one of the first, maybe a few hundred people, but I was one of the first people to go into the Bent Pyramid. So it's kind of also a cool little, little story.
Yeah.
Along with
I was going to say the Bent Pyramid is probably the most challenging effort to get in and out of all the pyramids. It's a real long way down, and it's very, very low down. I've bashed my back on that a few times coming out, in and out, because it's lower than many of the other shafts.
Yeah.
I was gonna just mention, you've had rare access, to places that people don't see. You mentioned one was the Abusir pyramids. Have you had other kind of encounters like that?
Well, there have been
I think you mentioned it, right place, right?
Yeah, there's been a few unlikely things. Last time I was hosting a group tour or co-hosting a group tour, last year, we travelled down to Aswan in the town, and we took the little boat ride out to Philae, the Temple of Isis, which is a beautiful temple. If anyone finds himself in Egypt, it's well worth a visit. And we went out there with the group, and it was a nice day. The weather was pretty good. When we arrived on the island, as we were getting off the boat to go onto the island to look at the temple, all of the tourists were coming off of the island and they were being kicked off. And my friend Hassan, he went and spoke to the guards there, and he seems to have the gift. He has the gift of the gab. He's very good with, like making things happen. He went and spoke to the guards, and they said that there'd been a weather warning for strong winds, so they were clearing the island, which was really bizarre, because to clear the island, it meant everyone had to get on boats and go on the river. So I don't know why they would do that if the wind was high. It didn't make sense. But nonetheless, the entire temple and the island was cleared of all tourists, and there was just a handful of guards left. But they let us stay on the island with a bit of just my friend sort of talked to the guards. And so we had the whole island to ourselves for the group for about 2 hours, and there was no wind. It was bizarre. It was just like some unlikely happening. And then when we were done, they opened it again, and suddenly all the tourists started turning back up on their boats. So yeah, just completely out of the blue, we got the whole island to ourselves. And at the end of the same tour, I went on the day after the tour group had all gone home. I went for another visit to the Great Pyramid with my friend. And when we arrived first thing in the morning, because we wanted to get into the pyramid on our own if we could. But we got in and it was very busy on the site, even though we got in as it opened. And so we started walking to the entrance of the Great Pyramid, and there were a queue of maybe 20 or more tourists there waiting to go inside the pyramid. And we got up there and the queue wasn't moving. So I walked up to the front to see why the queue wasn't moving to go in. And as it turned out, there'd been a power cut in the pyramid. So it was completely black inside. So they weren't letting anyone in until they got the electric back on. But the guard that was at the entrance that was stopping people coming in, he recognised me and my friend because we'd been in there before, and he knew that we liked going in there and giving a little bribe to jump in the sarcophagus and do resonance toning. He knew that was the thing we were up for. And so when he saw us and he recognised us, he just grabbed me by the hand, and I grabbed my friend by the hand, and he just pulled us straight past all of the queue and walked us straight into the pyramid with his flashlight. And he walked in so far and then just left us to it. So we went in, and I'm a lot more energetic than my friend was, so I went in ahead. And so I got into the King's Chamber in the pyramid completely on my own for quite a while in the pitch dark. And so I was able to do a meditation in there, and then jump into the sarcophagus of the stone box in there and do resonance toning, because the chamber there is very resonant. If you make a vocal tone at the right pitch, the whole room starts to shake. It's quite profound. And so that was something I'd always dreamt of, being able to go there and do that on my own in the dark. It's like the ultimate meditation space, And so that was really lucky. And we came out of there, and I was really elated and really overjoyed. It was like a sort of unexpected dream come true for me. And then my friend left, and I hung out in Cairo for another week or so. And I went back again 5 days later, and again the same guard was there. This time the pyramid was normal, the electric was on. But he followed me into the pyramid on this second occasion. And usually as a tourist, when you go inside the Great Pyramid, the King's Chamber's open, but the other chambers, the Queen's Chamber and the underground one, they're always locked unless you pay a hefty fee to the government. And I've done that before for a group. So I've been in the chambers with a group, but for thousands of pounds, But on this occasion, I went in on my own, and the guard that had let us do the meditation in there a few days before, he followed me in, and he just opened the Queen's Chamber for me, and he said, there you go, just come out in 10 minutes and I'll be here to let you out. So I had the whole Queen's Chamber to myself for about 10 minutes in the dark. And in the far distance, I could hear all the regular tourists walking around the other bits of the pyramid, and I was just there on my own in there. It's quite profound. And I feel like you said before, like you touched upon, it feels like Egypt has the potential and the capacity for that more than other places, perhaps, where from my own experience, it feels like very unlikely things just align at the right moment. on a regular basis, I've been so lucky so many times, it seems beyond coincidence. It seems like there's something quite unique about Egypt in that sense.
Yeah, we call that essence like the temporary locals essence.
Yeah.
Where you just stumble into something and awesome things happen. It's like, wow. You mentioned that Egypt was very transformative for you and can be kind of like a catalyst for inner work for others. So, kind of two questions here. What kind of inner work do you think that it tends to bring up for people? And then also, you mentioned that you've had kind of group trips. So, have you ever brought someone on a trip and kind of watched them transform in real time? And if so, what did that look like?
Okay, so yeah, when I started visiting Egypt, I hadn't kind of thought of it through that lens. I wasn't looking for transformation. But even since my first ever visit, I came home from there and I felt like something changed in my perspective of life, where I suddenly felt like I wanted to really take the reins of my life and learn how to sort of harness my true will, like to actually live by choice instead of necessity. Because prior to that, I'd spent a lot of my life not very kind of grounded and just sort of working in whatever jobs came my way. I never really had much in the way of like free time of abundant wealth, like not that I'm wealthy now, but life felt more like it was happening to me prior to that, and I was just at the whim of whatever cropped up, and I had to muddle my way through. I came back the first time, and I thought, no, I'm not satisfied with myself living that way. I want to learn how to grasp the life, but take the reins and actually learn how life works, and learn how to navigate in a more kind of wholesome, holistic way where I can work with the world around me instead of it happening to me, recognize myself as a part of an interactive process. And the feeling was not very clear in my mind. It was just a feeling, and it started to steer my life that way. But coinciding with that, I got deeper into my studies, my esoteric studies, and I found as I started to go more and more times to Egypt, I started to then bring more intention with me, in the sense that I would start to engage with the process, like before I go out to a sacred site, for example, maybe do some like meditation, maybe a mantra, or really get into the kind of archetypal principles that are represented by the deities that said temple might be dedicated to. So, if you're going to go to a temple that's dedicated to Amun-Ra, well, Amun is the invisible, the hidden one, and Ra is the radiance, the shining. So that if a temple is dedicated to Amun-Ra, for example, one way you can work with that archetypal principle is to consider what you have hidden within you and how you want to express it out to the world. So just to use it as a sort of kind of framework to develop your mental structure, the way you show up in life, and using that principle to really engage with the places, to see, if the people that built these places clearly put a lot of care and attention and detail into the way they're structured and the geometry and the proportions and so on, and the symbols. So to try and reach into the spaces to recognize and work with the unique attributes of each of the temples and pyramids, and so to try and take up on a kind of initiatic journey, interactive journey. And the more I kind of took that approach, the more I felt like it reciprocated. And then the world around me, my life, when I come home, my life over the many years I've been going there is completely transformed. And I've been very lucky and blessed to find a lot more freedoms in my life and to restructure my life. And it feels like it's not with the studies and the research that I do takes a great deal of effort in a very loving way. It's not like a difficult thing for me. I love the effort that I make, but it feels like the experience of being in these structures and doing meditations and resonance toning and pyramids and so on, it feels like it's kind of harmonized my kind of lens on the world around me. And so I've been able to engage with life more authentically and recognize opportunities when they come up, and actually step up and have a go. And that, combined with then what we touched on earlier with the COVID lockdowns as well, when the world opened again, and I'd also already been undergoing this kind of inner transformation of like bringing forth what's hidden within me to try and bring it forth into the world. That, compared with the world being shut for a while, once the borders opened, I felt so compelled to just seize the day and to stop procrastinating and stop hesitating and stop self-doubting, and realize that, I'd held myself back a lot over the years. I've had a lot of creative interests over the years in like music production and DJing and art and design, which I've loved doing, but I've never really felt like I've got to the sort of potential of it. And I've like been too perfectionist. I've been looking for a finished result before I show it to people and stuff like this. And I've kind of hijacked my own development in earlier years. But I think that spending a lot of time in Egypt and really engaging with the place and with the modern culture there, but specifically with like digging into the ancient kind of mythology and trying to get a grasp of why the people in the ancient world had such a strong motivation to leave these incredible structures. It meant something to them. And I've been trying to embody that meaning through whatever way I'm able to reach it. And so I feel like I've learned to live in the present moment, get out of my thoughts and get out of my head and get into the here and now. So, and another layer of that, aside from the kind of interaction with temples and pyramids, also it's so mind-blowing, even just as a visual spectacle, to see these incredible structures. It's kind of pulls you into the here and now, because who can be lost in their thoughts when they're looking at a pyramid that's like bigger than the biggest tower? It's really helped me to engage with the here and now and to stay present in my life, not get lost in the past or projected into the future. Just look at where I am and see, what can I do now? What opportunities are available to me today? And yeah, I've got a sense of direction, things I'd love to do in my life, but I don't kind of dwell on some future date. I just engage here and now.
And I know some people may feel this way also, but do you think that going to Egypt and seeing like specifically the pyramids of Giza, do you think that can almost make you jaded in a way? Like once you see those structures for the rest of your life, like nothing else really compares. And so like it's hard to like appreciate anything once you see something like that, because it's like everything else just seems kind of bland compared to it. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I get your point there. And yeah, I mean, I've never encountered anything that compares in scale and precision and awe, And so since spending a lot of time in Egypt, when I've gone to other ancient sites, I was recently in Mexico, for example, and looking at the pyramids there for the first time. It's my first time there. And it was an incredible experience. But what I was looking at looked like something built by everyday folks. I could see that people built this. The people that I'm familiar with in the modern world could achieve that. They're incredible. They're really incredible, but the blocks aren't so big and the precision isn't so precise. So it's been an interesting point of reference to have like the Egyptian pyramids there in the sort of burned into my subconscious now. And yeah, so there is a bit of a kind of, they set the benchmark so high that nothing really compares. But in terms of what I can get from that I think's perhaps beneficial for me, at least in my studies and my research, is to consider then how, if they're kind of so much more impressive, then I suspect that they go back further in time. And so when I see other cultures around the world doing kind of similar things, but not as grand and not as precise, it does give me a real sort of sense that there was something really incredible in the very distant past. And we're living in the echo of it. In all the ancient world, it's all the echoes of something greater and grander. And I think perhaps the Egyptian pyramids are the sort of last fragment and remnant of the really ancient stuff. Not the only one, but, the most impressive, that really captures some essence of what the prior civilization might have been. Because although there are other incredible, very ancient things around the world in like South America or Baalbek in Lebanon, I haven't been there to Baalbek, but some of the stuff there is incredible, of course. But the pyramids are something different. They're so kind of, it's not like a temple that's all like decorative. They're just very abstract, like simple, elegant beauty, simple geometry. That's simple yet contains so much information and knowledge. If you look at the Great Pyramid, aside from the scale and the precision of the thing, and any sort of topic you choose to look at through the lens of the pyramid, be it maths or geometry or astronomy or astrology or mythology, symbolism, geography, geology, like any of these topics, if you look at the pyramid through any of these lenses, it has something to say about it. It's like a sort of a storehouse of knowledge and information and for myself, I've studied the pyramid, and I like to draw geometry, and I've drawn pictures of the pyramid and tried to get it as precise as I can over years, and I've drawn it hundreds and hundreds of times. So I know all the angles and the measurements, and I feel like it's like the gift that keeps on giving. The more I look at it, the more I learn about maths, and the more I learn about geometry, or even anatomy, the structure of the human eye, the structure of the brain. Like looking through the specific dimensions and proportions of the pyramid, you can see, if you look at it in a certain way, you can see that it even proportionately relates to the structure of the human body in ways that are a bit difficult to describe with words. But, like when you're drawing it on the page, you can overlay images, or in Photoshop and so on. And so for something that's just like a triangle made of stone, it seems to encode sort of like loads of really fundamentally important things that are really important to the human story. And of course, another factor as well is that with Egypt crops up. It's so like fundamental and significant in the human story. It's in the Bible, and it goes back in so many directions, and in all the kind of mystery schools and secret societies, they have all these like pyramid symbolism and so on. So it seems to be completely integral to the human story in so many ways.
Yeah. I mean, I think what you said was really interesting, and it's important that when you visit certain other ancient sites around the world, like for example, Mesoamerican ancient sites and things like that, they're not on the same magnitude and scale as a lot of the structures in Egypt, but they're not as obvious, But I mean, when you look at the engineering that went into a lot of Mayan sites, and the astrology and the acoustics, and the way the sun hits the temple and it makes a shadow of the feathered serpent going down the staircase, all that kind of stuff, like those sites aren't as obviously impressive, but the design and engineering that went into them is also very incredible. Yeah, Egypt's just, to look at it, it's just on a whole nother level though.
Yeah, for sure. I'd like to tell you another funny story, if I may. When I hosted my first group tour a few years back, and we went all over the place. It was like a 14-day tour. I put far too much in the itinerary. We were all exhausted by the end of it. But in my everyday life, I dress quite casual in kind of, like jeans and hooded tops and Nike trainers and so on. Like I'm very kind of, just blend in with the daily life. But when I'm hosting tours, I like to sort of be a bit more presentable, not too casual looking. So I like to put on a shirt maybe, and just, like I don't get carried away, but I look a bit kind of more together than I do when I'm driving a truck or working as a carpenter, which are other things I do in my practical life. But we went to visit the lesser known pyramid of Maidum, which is about a 2-hour drive south of Giza. And the pyramid itself, comparatively less impressive than other pyramids, but it's still great to see. And as an everyday tourist, if you go to that site, you just go to the pyramid. You can go inside it, and that's the visit. And I went there with the group, but there's an off-limits place that's on the site, which is an underground chamber. I don't know if you're familiar with what a mastaba is. It's like an underground chamber tomb that has a small building on top. And there's a mastaba that's next to the pyramid, which is generally off limits, and everyday tourists don't know about it because it's not advertised. It's not on the menu, so to speak. But because I'm quite sort of more deeply into the places, I was well aware of this off limits underground chamber that I really wanted to go in. And so once we'd looked around the pyramid, I spoke to my friend, and we went and spoke to the guard. And I said, how about, could we go in this mastaba? It's called Mastaba 17, just as the M17 is what it's known as. And the guard was quite surprised that I was aware of it, because it's not well known. And so with, like a small bribe to a few of the guards, we were allowed to go in. And now when you go in there, it's an underground chamber, but the original entrance hasn't actually been fully excavated. So the way you access it is to crawl down a tiny little tunnel that's just cut into the ground. So half of the group didn't want to go in. They thought it looked a little bit kind of claustrophobic. But we went in, a few of us, and you go down like, I don't know, maybe 20 or 30 feet down this little tunnel, and then down a shaft, down a rickety ladder. And then you have to like scurry through on your belly in the dust in a little tiny gap to get through into the chamber. And then you're in there, and there's a granite box. And it's a cool place, and there's like bats flying around. It felt like a real like Indiana Jones moment. And I'd wanted to go there for a long time. I was like lucky that they allowed us in and so on. But the funny thing is, what I was coming to with the story is, by the time we'd had our time in there and then come back out, my Egyptian friend Hassan, he'd been chatting to the guards, and because I looked a little bit kind of smarter than I usually do, and I was, when I host tours, technically you're supposed to have an Egyptian tour guide, like a licensed tour guide, but I go with friends and acquaintances, and I'm not really into the official narrative, so I tend to guide the group. And then my Egyptian friend, he's not a guide, but he does know a lot of the stuff that the guides would know as well. So between us, we're like a double act. But by the time we came out of the mastaba, he kind of spoke to the guards, and they'd made the assumption, since I was hosting the group and guiding the group, they'd made the assumption that I was that I had a PhD in like Egyptology or archaeology or something, and I have nothing of the sort. Like I'm an enthusiast and I study a lot, but I don't have any paper qualifications to prove anything. But they made the assumption that I was like a Dr. Kane, the high-flying Egyptologist or PhD. I just rolled with it. It was funny for the group. All the group found it hilarious because these are like friends and relatives that have known me for a while. They know that they know that I'm. But because the guards went with that, and if you travelled around Egypt as you have, you'll know that if you travel by road over a long distance, you have to go through police checkpoints and so on. Once they thought I was a VIP, they asked us where we were going to go next. Our next port of call was to do a 4.5-hour drive across a sort of desert roads to the Fayoum Oasis. And they said, "Oh, but you're a VIP. You need an escort." And so they laid on a free military armed escort for the whole 4.5-hour journey for our little tour bus. So we were like, we were laughing all the way. There's this like pickup truck in front with all these guards with their machine guns, like making sure that I was safe to go across the desert.
Oh my gosh, what an incredible story. To think that, they were going to offer you an escort, kind of here or there, but 4 hours they took you. And is it just kind of help you get past the checkpoints and things like that? Or
just to keep me safe on the desert road so I didn't get kidnapped or anything. Not that happens, but that's their kind of motivation for it, that like, oh, if you're an important person, that they seem to think I was, like they're really protective of tourists and visitors because it's their lifeblood of the country. So although from my experience, it's a very safe country, going back decades, there have been times where it's been not safe and tourists have been targeted at various times, going back a long time, so I don't feel any fear when I go. But nonetheless, they're so very protective of tourists and visitors because they can't afford to have someone getting kidnapped and ransomed or something crazy like that, or robbed or anything like that. And I don't think or feel that that's going to happen. I go there and I go there again and again, and I feel great. But from their perspective, they're like, if they perceive you as someone of value, they're like, well, if someone else perceives you as that same one of value, you might be at risk. So, they wanted to protect that basically. So yeah, funny stuff like that happens in Egypt. And the more frequently you go, the more chance there is of it, because I feel like the more you settle into the place and the more you relax into the environment and feel at home there, that seems somehow to invite more unlikely phenomena to occur in a funny kind of way.
Yeah. So how did you kind of make that transition from somebody who was just a regular traveler interested in Egypt to decide to start doing tours? I mean, how did that kind of come about?
There was a couple of factors, really. On the one hand, I'd been studying kind of all things esoteric for many years, just for my own pleasure, really, with no kind of idea of why I was doing it other than just, fascinated with study. But then again, to return back to the lockdown in 2020, I got a lot deeper into my studies there because I had nothing else to do. And at the point we started to be able to mix between houses again when the lockdown started to lift, delved so deeply into my studies. And I've been like studying the various sort of mystery school stuff for more than 15 years now. So, I've gone through lots of phases with it. But this was a real deep dive in 2020, 2021, when we could start having, people could start coming around to each other's houses again. By that point, I felt like, after all these years of study, I felt like I'd started to, I had a vast body of knowledge that I felt like I'd like to start sharing with people. And I'd never done anything like that before. I'd never sort of spoken to a group. I'd never taught anything, like I've worked in very practical jobs all my life. But because I felt like I had something to say all of a sudden, some of my relatives and their friends, I invited them to come and listen to me do some talks and some presentations and like show them some slides and some pictures of some of the stuff that I've been studying, just to see if I was able to sort of express what I found really interesting. And as it turned out, I got really good feedback, and I got into this kind of rhythm for a few years of doing like talks and presentations and workshops and slideshows, talking about ancient history, prehistory, mythology, geometry, the endocrine system and the chakras, doing meditation, singing bowls sessions, delving into nutrition and all kinds of things. I got such good feedback. And because I'd been going to Egypt and exploring these sites, I was realizing I had a lot to say about Egypt and Egyptian temples and pyramids. And so I saw the possibility to bring the two together. And so the first few tours I'd done, I created a series of slideshow presentations that told a kind of a story of prehistory moving through the ages right up down to the present. And the way I pieced the story together in the slideshows, which were sequential, if I was looking for certain myths or symbols that conveyed my story, I would like focus on a particular temple that was maybe dedicated to that deity, or a temple or a pyramid that had a particular part of history that fitted in my story. So then I would structure the itinerary for the tour to coincide with the sequence that I unfolded in the presentation, so that I could bring people to Egypt and I could do like part one of a presentation and say, oh, there's this story with these characters and these symbols and so on. And then over the coming days, we'd go to the sites that I talked about in the presentation while it was fresh in their mind. And then I'd give them the next installment and then we'd go to the next sites. So the two kind of paired together. And the other part to it was that, of course, like going on wild adventure holidays to faraway lands isn't a cheap hobby. And, like I'm able to get out of the country, I'm able to earn money and go and do these things. But I realized there was so much to see in Egypt that I was going to satisfy my desire to see and experience so many places. I thought, that's going to take so many visits, that how can I justify going to a country like 10 or more times just out of my own pocket, just because I want to see this stuff, even though I want to see it. It's like, I've got a life to tend to as well. I've got other responsibilities and other places I'd like to go as well. So I figured if I had something that I felt valuable to share with people, if I felt like I could actually offer something of interest and something of value to people to warrant actually bringing them to the places, I felt my kind of reward for that was that I could justify going to more of the places because I was bringing people, so that helped subsidize the process. So in sharing the experience and selling a tour, so to speak, it gave me the opportunity and the motivation to keep going. And so that's served as a kind of platform for me to explore much more deeply into the country. And as I've been undergoing that process, my friend Hassan, who I work with, he does all the logistics for the tours and arranges all of the transportation internally and so on. And as I've been developing and opening the door for me to go there and experience by bringing people with me, that in turn is boosted his tourism business by me and my friends and their friends all going to hire his services in tourism. And so as I've grown through that process, he's also been growing through that process and becoming much more kind of anchored into that kind of way of living. And now he's got his own hotel and he's really expanding. As we're developing the tours and the travels, the possibilities are growing with us, and he's providing better facilities and expanding and getting his family involved and so on. So we have the potential, if we continue the process of this, like growing the tour business, to really kind of grow out into all kinds of directions. And another factor there where I've been primarily focusing on the ancient sites, which I want to continue to do because there's still loads I want to see or see again. But the additional layers that are sort of growing into that is to explore the kind of natural habitat a bit more. I've been out on the Red Sea quite a few times, and sometimes I bring groups out there. We hire a boat and diving structures and all the equipment, so people can go diving in the coral reef, for example, on the tours. But I'd like to expand on that a bit more, so that instead of it just being like running around in the desert looking at old buildings, which obviously it's a lot more fun than it sounds if you just put it like that, but to include like diving in the Red Sea, or maybe going out into the desert to swim in a oasis, or, you know, stuff like that, exploring the natural habitat. I think in the long run, I can kind of put together a much more a holistic, kind of multifaceted tour, like a more immersive experience that might appeal to a wider audience.
Yeah, it's an interesting trajectory, you know, going from being just an enthusiast to actually running tours over there. That's really awesome that you do that.
Yeah, and so much so that, people are mistaking you for
For a
Egyptologists.
PhD. Yeah. So let me get your thoughts. I wanted to ask you about this. I know you're obviously aware, as anybody that's into ancient Egypt is aware. What are your thoughts on like the SAR scan stuff that's coming out with the team from Italy? What do you think about that and the possibility just recently that they're claiming that they may have found a second Sphinx on the Giza plateau?
Huh. Yeah, I'm very familiar with the work, and I mean, of course, it's a brand new technology, so new in the realm of archaeology, anyway. Although they've been exploring the technology in other areas prior to that. So, you know, I've listened to a lot. I've listened to a lot of the talks from the guys doing it, as well as other people other commentaries on it, and I feel that they're really onto something, primarily because the data they're providing seems to, you know, like where they know there are underground structures, those underground structures show up on their scans, like the Osiris shaft, things like that. And the way the data is presented, I get a real strong feeling that the people present it are very authentic, and they wholly believe it in themselves. So I don't feel any sense of kind of embellishment of the facts. They're just presenting their findings. But the thing is, from my own perspective, I suspect that the pyramids go back a lot further back into prehistory than we generally taught, as do a lot of people now. It's become ever more popular for people to entertain the ideas of an advanced prehistoric civilization. But even the stuff we know about under the ground in Egypt, for example, just down the road from Giza, Saqqara, there are about 7 or 8 or 9 stories deep of tunnels that are definitely there, that people can pay a hefty fee to go down and explore. And I've spoke to the guards and the archaeologists at that site before, and they've shown me bits of footage of the deep down underground tunnels. So we know that's there. And that's not on a solitary case. You know, there's lots of really incredible deep underground stuff littered across Egypt. And so then to find out that there are scans to show that under the Giza pyramids, well, it's incredible and it's exciting, but to me, it's not surprising in the sense that it seems more likely that the pyramids were some kind of functional and mysterious structures. I don't believe the idea that they were built for tombs, not for a moment. Of course, there are 1,000,001 different takes on what they might have been built for, but I'll say that my take on it is that I'm most certain that they were functional in some sense, whether that's in an energetic sense of some sort. I don't necessarily assume that it was energetic in the terms of creating something like electricity. It could have been included that, or there are other researchers that suggest the pyramids were chemical manufacturing plants. I don't dispute the possibility that they might have included chemicals, but I don't think any of the theories I've heard take into account all of the significant features of the pyramids. I don't think anyone's got the full picture. And so to find out there's much more underground, and the things that we're shown in the scans, you know, like under the middle pyramid, these 8 columns going down like a mile or something silly, and then cubic chambers at the bottom that all look very regular and the same as one another. And then we find there's more under the other pyramids. All of that, none of that looks like anything other than function. You know, I can't imagine any reason you'd dig that deep into the ground for some symbolic or ceremony or funerary purpose. You know, it doesn't add up in any kind of sense. It looks more like something something functional at a really mega industrial scale. And so when we consider the possibility that, yeah, there's some stuff under the ground, and then perhaps that reinforces the notion that the pyramids are a functional kind of device of sorts. And then if we take into consideration a number of the different theories as to what they might have served as, none of which factor in all of the features, And then from my own studies and research and other researchers that kind of parallel some of my studies, I see stuff about like the human form and anatomy and brain chemistry, neurology. There's so much in the structure of the pyramid that reflects the actual structure of the chemicals that the glands in our brain make, like serotonin and melatonin, which regulate and modulate our sort of sensory encounter of reality. There's so much there that I feel like the functional purpose for the pyramids, I don't know the answer, but I entertain ideas that they might have been something that was where they could harness the power of the human imagination to somehow interact more directly with the surrounding environment in a kind of, I'm reluctant to use the word God, but in a kind of godlike manner where the sort of like the contents of your imagination might have had a much greater bearing on the world around you if you were working in tandem with these incredible structures. They seem to imply something of a kind of mind amplification or something of that nature. And I play with these ideas. I'm not like set on any conclusion, like I'm not saying it's a definitely this or definitely not that. But I feel like there's a lot more mystery to them, especially with the SAR scans now. It's like, how long can the official narrative like prop up the idea that they were built for some tomb just to bury someone? I mean, it seems to beg a belief that you'd put together your best kind of artisans and stonemasons and architects and designers to build the most incredible structure on the planet that lasts thousands and thousands of years, the entire resources of a country to build a graveyard. It just sounds like nonsense to me. So yeah, I'm really excited about the SAR scan stuff because, that's like really kind of tipping the balance much more in the public arena to show that, like we don't know what these things are, but we're damn sure that they're more than we've been told. And there's so many factors pointing in that direction now. So it's a really exciting time for me in that sense. And one of
Yeah.
one of the things that I'm kind of pleased about with that as well is because the SAR scan stuff's done from satellite, they don't have to go through the Egyptian Antiquities Department to get permissions. So there's no like blockage. They can just do the thing and they're like, there you go. And that changes the dynamic entirely, because until then, everything that had to be done actually on location was just filtered through the authorities and through the Antiquities Department. So they had like total control of the narrative. So I think this is an exciting time for humanity because this principle is like breaking down borders and boundaries,
Yeah. You're talking about Zahi Hawass, the head of the Antiquities. Yeah, I think it's a really fascinating time and exciting time to be a fan of ancient history, and especially if you're in the alternative space, because I think the mainstream narrative is really kind of crumbling before our eyes as things like this, as technology gets better and as there's more exposure to people in the alternative space that have these alternative theories that, not saying they're all true, but it just kind of gives a little bit more of a, it kind of sheds light on like what all the things we don't know and what these things could have been. Because I think, like you said, a lot of the mainstream narrative of what we've been told is kind of doesn't really add up. And I think people are seeing that more and more. You mentioned like chemical production and everything, and that's something that I got really deep into the land of chem and Jeffrey Drum and his work, and a lot of that stuff, his videos and everything and his book are very detailed, and a lot of it goes over my head. But just things like that, Christopher Dunn, there's all kinds of people in the space that have different theories for what these structures were. And but I think you're right. I think they're definitely not what we've been told. So interesting.
Of course,
Thanks for sharing.
of course, with the various types of scanning, the SAR scans and LiDAR and so on, there's quite a lot being spoken about with the Hawara labyrinth recently as well, which is really exciting. You're aware of that one? Yeah, like it's kind of comical really in the sense where the official narrative's been so heldily tight for so long. As more and more is coming out through various means and with SAR scanning and other things, as time goes on, it seems like more and more is coming out quicker and quicker, and they're like desperately trying to sort of like cling on to this narrative, and it's just getting laughable. The official narrative just becomes like, it seems a bit like a sort of kid's story. And a lot of the archaeology in Egypt and Egyptology, a hell of a lot of the story of the sort of dynastic Egyptians and the narrative that's been pieced together has been around for like a couple of 100 years or more, 100 or 200 years. And it's You know, like we're in a completely different place in time now, and we've got more technology and more access to knowledge, not just for professors in universities, but for everyone on the internet. You know, like all of a sudden in recent years, anyone and everyone, if they have the will and the means and the motivation, everyone can research in their own way. And we've all got something to say if we choose to. And I think this is helping to transform humanity in a lot of ways. You know, independent research has become so much more accessible in tandem with the advancements in technology. And you know, yes, it's such an exciting time, and I feel like over the sort of very sort of soon and not very distant future, I feel like we might well be exposed to some more mind blowing things. You know, as more and more momentum goes and the official narrative crumbles completely, I think in the long run we're going to have a lot more exciting things to find out about. And of course, we won't know till it happens. Yeah, it's interesting as well for the journey I've been on with this. When I first started to study pyramids and geometry and architecture and prehistory, it wasn't really kind of a big thing online. You know, there were a handful of people that were like pioneers, like Graham Hancock, John Anthony West, Carmen Bolter, people like that. But I'd sort of been getting into this for a long while, and I felt like it was just this thing I was just some like nerdy kind of guy that was, you know, like I didn't like, or none of my friends had any idea why I was interested in Egypt or pyramids. They're like, you know, what's that about? You know, like they didn't really they didn't make the connection as to why it might be interesting or exciting or even very meaningful if you start getting into like the sort of human origin story. You know, it's not just like a hobby, it's kind of fundamental for us to know who and what we are if we're able. And so it's been really exciting for me over more recent years that suddenly the world around me, and particularly the online community, is suddenly like booming with this ancient history stuff. So I feel like I've landed in a really exciting and really favourable place in my life where something that I've had a deep passion for a lot of years, suddenly there's a platform for me to actually share my excitement, and there's potentially an audience to receive it, which there might not have been going back like 10, 15, 20 years, you know.
Yeah, and kind of to piggyback on that, we know you're writing a book. So do you want to tell everybody kind of what that process is like and what your book's about?
Yeah, okay.
If you prepare.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll say a little. I'll try and kind of convey the idea. So, for the many years of study, there's been like study in terms of reading and listening to documentaries, studying all the stuff that other people have made. And then to parallel that, I've been creating various things. I've gone through different phases of like, for a long while, I was working with music production and sound and resonance and sound design, stuff like that, exploring like binaural beats and various other things. And then I kind of, after lots of years of that, I went into kind of drawing and geometry, sacred geometry, studying architecture and stuff like that. Not in any kind of class or college or university setting, just in my own space, just drawing the information that I was sort of drawn to. And so I've experimented with different creative outputs along the journey. And then I started to do these sort of like talks and workshops and slideshows, talking to small groups. And I started to feel like a lot of the stuff that I'd studied and explored had given me a lot of my own kind of thoughts and ideas and realizations, where I was joining the dots and building my own kind of framework and structure that was drawing from the work of others. But, you know, when I do a talk or a presentation, I'm not just sharing other people's information, I'm sharing my kind of lens that draws on all these things. It's my own kind of creative work. And after speaking to groups quite a lot of times, I started to feel like, you know, every talk, every presentation that I do carries sort of information that I feel it's meaningful to me. And from the good feedback I've been getting, I felt like it was meaningful to others. And because it's, you know, like if you delve into very esoteric subjects and you talk to people about it in a session, in a group, they might take a lot of it on board at the time, but then they walk away and they can't recall all of it. So they've got a sort of feeling from the experience of the information that I've shared and the ideas and the concepts that I've put forward. But it's hard for people to hold it in mind in the long run. And I have friends coming back to me saying, "Oh, can you tell me a bit more about that thing you told me last time? You know, I know I liked it and I know it meant something, but I've forgotten the details, you know. It's too multi-layered. And I thought, I need to sort of contain this and capture it in some kind of way where people can walk away with it. And I've never written a book before, but, like I used to write a lot of poetry, and I had a little go at songwriting for a while, but I couldn't really get my voice together for it. And also among my many esoteric studies, that includes studying language and symbolism, vibration, the use of language, not only as a tool of communication, but, like in all the various sort of esoteric and magical traditions, there's a lot about the spoken word and the power of words and language and spelling and spells and stuff like that. And so I thought, like if I've been studying language, that's helped me to get a better grasp of how to use words to convey ideas, as well as talking to groups and learning how to convey things in a way that they actually receive it, and I can get the feedback to know that I've been heard and understood. So I've been gradually honing the skill. And then, so I started to sort of bring together all of my studies and my notes and my images and stuff to see if I had something to work with in terms of a book. And I mean, I've got so much material from so many years. I've probably got like enough content for many books, but I've just sort of taken a number of key topics, and I've started. Firstly, I decided what topics I was going to include in a book. I had a rough idea, and before I started the actual writing process, I dug as deeply into each of those topics as I could and done the most thorough research that I was able or willing to do on each given topic. And I've done that with all of the topics now. So I've got lots of folders of information on my computer with each folder contains a real like deep dive into each of the topics for each chapter of the book. So I've got these like chapter folders, and some of the stuff I've then gone on to start writing up. So I've got some stuff that's like finished sections of writing, and some stuff that's like draft sections, and some stuff that's still just like in notes and reference form, and I need to do some illustrations, but I've got some of that done as well. And so that's the way I'm approaching the project. The project itself, I feel like in life, in the human life, internally and externally, like this idea of as above, so below, this sort of alchemical maxim that, like we're a microcosm of the macrocosmic world around us, or the cosmos. And where I've been studying all these different topics, I've started to see common threads and patterns that seem to link together between such an array of different topics that seem separate. But if you see the pattern, you see that they're all expressions of the same pattern that are showing up differently depending on the area of life. And, like if you're familiar in any way of like the notions of quantum physics and a holographic universe, and the basic premise of the hologram is that all parts contain the whole. Everything is the same pattern at various scales and various expressions and elaborations on the same fundamental pattern. And through my many studies of the Great Pyramid, I found within the Great Pyramid, I've sort of pulled out of that a certain sort of principle and pattern that I've then been able to apply to lots of different disciplines, and see that pattern fits in neurology, brain chemistry, anatomy, mythology, linguistics, geography, architecture, psychology. There's so many like areas that it goes into, but it's just all expressions of one common pattern. And without giving that away too much before the book gets finished, to see that and to see the same pattern cropping up in all sort of realms and scales of life, I look through that lens as I explore new topics and see if my sort of theory holds true, that, okay, if this is like one of the fundamental patterns of the holographic universe, if that's so, then it'd have to show up in some way in all phenomena, because that's the hologram. Every part contains the whole. And so, I'm not going to profess to say that I have all the answers to this, or that I'm not going to say that I'm right on it, but I found a sort of very simplistic, very easy to grasp pattern that does so far fit into all the topics that I've been studying for many years. And once I made that connection, everything that I've studied as separate disciplines for 15, 16, 17 years suddenly all interlocked into a coherent kind of pattern. And so I've been writing chapters on all these different disciplines and topics, but presenting the common thread as the kind of backbone of the book. So it's kind of, when people talk about holistic kind of lifestyle, oftentimes they mean in terms of like eating locally sourced food and herbal remedies, natural remedies, meditation, like healthy living, which is great. I'm all up for that. but it tends to be lifestyle kind of holistic living. And then in another realm, we've got like in science, in physics and so on, people try to come up with a unified theory of the universe that encompasses everything, but it comes through abstract equations that are sort of like only sort of accessible by people in that kind of mindset. But from the way I've started to view it is that true unified theory or holistic living would encompass all phenomena from the ground we're walking on, biological life, stars, planets, calendars, time cycles, anatomy, biology, nutrition, psychology, like a truly holistic, unified theory of life would by necessity have to be able to hold all things. And as I said, I don't profess to have all the answers. I'm not saying I've got that, but that's the kind of impetus that I'm going into the projects with, of like, like what does tie everything together? What patterns are common to all phenomena? And if we can grasp at that, perhaps we can see that, like there is actual unity in life, in a very easy to see way once you're shown it. It's like, so I'm not like writing a book of answers, but rather a book that I would hope might serve as a lens. It's like a way of seeing rather than telling you what you're looking at. It's like, how about looking at life like this? Have you considered it this way? Like that kind of approach. I'm not telling people, I'm not asking for belief in any of the things I'm writing about. It's not like something to believe or not. It's not dogmatic. It's just an approach and a way of looking. And what I would like to kind of reach towards and hopefully achieve through this project in some way is to demonstrate in very sort of simple, common sense terms that we are wholly a part of the world around us, the part of the cosmos. We do belong here in life, because in the modern world, between the kind of religious or political kind of systems that would have us in some sense be like, like born in sin, like we're in the way and we've got to like behave a certain way to sort of get off the hook, or like in the sort of reductionist science sense that we're like meaningless nothings in a dead universe. It's all an accident. I don't go for that, and it doesn't feel like it's very helpful to people to feel like that we're a big accident. I don't see that as a very helpful kind of feeling to be brought up with. So I'm attempting to show very simplistic, easy to grasp, common sense examples of how what's happening inside of us and outside of us is all based on a common theme. And so we can't be separate from that. We are that, it's life's happening in us and to us and around us and through us. And so in a sense, it's kind of using science and anatomy and architecture and spirituality and showing that they're all kind of getting at the same thing. And if you look at like ancient disciplines like yoga, the word yoga means union. The word religion comes from Latin root religare, which also means union. And in the Egyptian tradition, the what we might sort of the nickname Egyptian yoga is called Sematuai, which means union of the two lands. And so the basic premise in lots of traditions is about living in a state of union and recognizing yourself in others and recognizing yourself in the world around you, and to develop a kind of a two-way interactive relationship with life where you don't feel like it's happening to you and you're like just at the whim of circumstance. But on the flip side, you don't go through like throwing your weight around and trying to dominate and force yourself onto life or to people. It's recognizing that the true magic and peaceful, happy, joyous life where things can go favorably is in recognizing that all encounters in life are relational. Like how you show up in the world around you is reflected back to you in some way. And if things happen to you that you don't find favorable, adopting a more unified kind of mindset can help to sort of negate the idea that you're a victim of circumstance and that life's happening to you. And you think, okay, well, if something unfavorable happens to me, why do I find it unfavorable? What does that tell me about me? What can I learn? So every day becomes a lesson instead of like something to like get through, so that's the kind of mindset that I'm trying to convey through this book project. And I'm quite a long way through it, but I've still got quite a chunk of work to do. But that's my current.
It sounds like you've, thought it well through, and it's based in all sorts of, aspects of, um, your studies. So, we've certainly enjoyed chatting with you today and learning more about it. So we'll look forward to when we can read it. But I know that you mentioned before during this podcast that you did group tours, and I happen to see that you're hosting one in Egypt in 2027. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, indeed. So in 2027, in August, there's going to be a full solar eclipse. And the best viewing platform in the world for the solar eclipse on that occasion will be in central Egypt. And so it seemed like something I have to do to make a tour then, So I booked in the dates for that. And so what we're going to be doing is we've got a tour that's going to start on the 29th of July, 2027. And we're going to start off in Luxor and spend a number of days looking at the tombs and temples, sort of getting into that. And then we're going to view the solar eclipse there and then carry on around the country down to Aswan, check out some stuff there, and then fly up to Cairo and sort of see the pyramids and so on. And this particular solar eclipse that's going to occur, the blackout in an eclipse is called the totality. And this one that's going to be happening next year is an unusually long totality. It's more than 6 minutes of total blackout. So it'll be quite a profound experience, I should imagine, to have that experience anywhere in the world, but let alone in the heart of Egypt. And it's actually the longest solar eclipse for the next century, so it's like literally once in a lifetime opportunity to have that. I've got the dates booked in from the 29th of July to the 8th of August, and I've got the itinerary drawn out for it. My friend Hassan in Egypt, me and him are just working through the final kind of details. So yeah, that's something I'm really excited about. I've never viewed a full solar eclipse directly like that before, so it's going to be, again, like I said earlier, what I touched upon was by hosting group tours, it affords me the beautiful opportunity to go and do these things myself. And so, yeah, and then what we're going to do as well, the tour is a 10-day tour of Luxor, Aswan and Cairo. But then as an additional add-on for any guests that choose to do so, we're going to go off to the Red Sea for a couple of days for some diving, like rent a boat and some dive instructors and some equipment. So that'll be kind of like the after party for the tour, so to speak.
Very cool. Very cool. Look forward to more details on that. And speaking of like the total, the eclipse, I think it was 2017, got to see one in Clemson, but I think it was only like 2 hours. Sorry, 2 minutes, not 2 hours. 2 minutes of darkness. So 6 minutes sounds incredible in Egypt. And we were also looking into going this year, 2026, to Iceland because there's going to be an eclipse in Iceland this year. So we kind of talked ourselves out of that one this year. But do you expect that it's going to be probably increasingly busy in Egypt at that time, or maybe not, because it's kind of like, it's going to be pretty hot there end of
Yeah,
July,
it will
right?
be exceptionally warm for sure.
It's always hot.
And when we do tours at sort of hotter times of the year, what we try to do is to go out as early as possible to do our visits so we can be back into the apartment or the hotel for the sort of peak of the day. But the eclipse is around midday. And in Luxor, where we're going to be during the eclipse, a lot of the hotels are already sold out for that point in the year. So it is going to be exceptionally busy. And now we would have liked the idea of going to one of the incredible temples and viewing the eclipse inside a temple. We did consider the idea, but I feel like if we were to do that at that time of year when it's incredibly hot and it's going to be so damn busy, it's going to be like being at a music festival or something. I don't doubt it's going to be like really packed out in there. So the facilities won't be quite adequate for the amount of people, toilets and so on. And to be in that environment in probably like 40 degrees or something crazy, I felt like it might not be very wise to go to a temple for the eclipse. So what we're going to do instead, I was just talking to Hassan today about it. We've got he has his own hotel there, so that's like the sort of initial plan, to just be in our own hotel and go up on the roof where we've got access to refreshments and facilities and so on. So that's the sort of like, we can definitely do that if we choose to, but we're just entertaining the idea now before we put the ad up as to whether we'll go just slightly out of town towards the desert in full view of the mountains of the Valley of the Kings, where all the royal tombs are. On the edge of Luxor, you can go out of town to the sort of beginnings of the desert, and we're thinking about setting up some Bedouin tents there and hanging out there instead. So we'll be sort of on the edge of the desert looking at the mountains of the Valley of the Kings for it. Yeah, and then we won't be amongst crowds if we do that. We'll have more of a kind of peaceful, kind of personal experience of it instead of being like, rammed in with loads of people.
Yeah, I'm sure like in Luxor, I'm sure Karnak is going to be busy and all those sites because I mean it would be really cool to see the totality of the eclipse from a temple like that. But you're right, it's probably going to be crazy.
Yeah, I think if I was going on my own to do it, I'd probably go to a temple just if I wasn't responsible for anyone, and I'm good with the heat. I can go out in any degrees heat, and I tend to get on all right with it. So yeah, if I was traveling solo, I'd just sort of like go and get involved. I do a lot of work in music festivals in the summer, so I'm used to crowds and I'm used to hot weather. But I wouldn't feel comfortable advertising a tour for that because who knows who's going to come on the tour, and there's every chance there'll be like a lot of people don't want to be out in like exceptionally hot weather, and it's like midday when the eclipse happens, so it could easily be 40 degrees or more than. I've been in Luxor before in May and it was averaging about 47 in the daytime, and like it's only like a handful of people that are going to be comfortable with that. Most people are just going to be really put out and it'll spoil the experience for them. So I figured, like nice as the temples will be, I'm sure it would be a like beautiful experience. But yeah, I think for practical reasons and health reasons for the group, like I think it's wise to sort of go a little bit more kind of out of town. So yeah, we're just looking at the idea of the Bedouin tents now. If we can make that work in a favourable way, we'll do that. But otherwise, we've got our own hotel as a backup.
Sounds awesome. Sounds like a great plan.
Yeah.
For those that want to kind of keep up with you and follow along, you're on Instagram and Facebook, is that right? And it's Mysteries
Yeah, that's
Cool?
right. And it's mystery spelt with a Y, not an IE. It's like it's singular, not plural. So MYSTERYS, cool, COOL. So it's like a play on words for mystery school, but mystery's cool.
Like it.
Um,
And
details of tours will be coming up on Instagram and Facebook of the solar eclipse tour and other tours as well. We do other Egypt tours, and I'm just a few weeks ago I went and done a solo trip across Mexico and Yucatan for the first time to have the experience, but also to do a recce for potential tours in Mexico in the future. So as things progress, that'll be something else that will be cropping up on the social media as well.
we're we're always down to do a tour, so we'll let you know.
Stay in touch. It'd be great to meet up in person. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Well, thank you, Vincent. Thank you for coming on and talking to us. And it was really fascinating. You're very well studied on ancient Egypt, and it was definitely a pleasure for me to really talk to somebody that I was kind of in that realm and really interested in that kind of space. So I appreciate you coming on and talking to
Yeah,
us.
I've had a great time. I thank you both for inviting me on, and yeah, it's been a real pleasure. It's exciting to share stories and ideas. Great,
Well, we will keep in
great.
touch.
Thank you so much.
Okay, guys, that was our episode with Vincent Kane on all of his wealth of knowledge in Egypt. I know that he was definitely, exercising your.
Yeah, him and I got along really well. I feel like him and I could probably sit down and talk for hours, but also just hearing his regular travel kind of stories and his
Yeah.
experiences in Egypt was really interesting. And yeah, I mean, he hosts tours, so he definitely knows his stuff. And anybody that's interested in going on one of his tours will probably post a link or
Yeah, I wonder if maybe we can share a slide or something like that from what he's got online, but you can also see it on his social media that we mentioned. But once again, it's Mysteries Cool, and I think he just mentioned it, but it's MYSTERYS and then cool. So
yeah.
awesome. Well, that was a really stimulating conversation. I know when you mentioned to him, like I think you said you might have used that word specifically, and I was like kind of thinking in my head, like I don't dive deep into the details like that with you. So I was like, thank you, Vincent.
Yeah. I walk around all day and I'm just like, hey, babe, did you know that ISIS about, and I'll say, and you're just like, whatever.
I love. Awesome. Well, that's it for this week. Thank you guys so much for listening. Let us know if you enjoyed the episode and all the different ways that are available to you, whether, you're on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube. Give a like, comment, download the episode. I don't even know all the ways that you can interact across the platforms, but if you guys liked it, we would love to hear from you. You can find us on Instagram at Temporary Locals Podcast. Jared is on Instagram at Rover Stover and also YouTube. I'm on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and Facebook at Nego Goes Global. And with that,
I'm Jared.
and I'm Megan. Thanks for exploring with us.
And remember, be a local anywhere you go.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.